Hi everyone and welcome back. It's Mindy here today for Lawn Fawn, and I have a spooky double slider surprise card to share with you today. I had a lot of fun creating this and I can't wait to share it with you. The stamp sets I'm using for this is the new Pick of the Patch. I also brought in some of the ghosts from Booyah. And then I'm also using the new Owlsome, so I wanted to have a lot of critters to go in my scene. I started out, I have all of my images stamped on Nina Solar White cardstock. This is 80 pounds. And I did stamp this in the Lawn Fawn black ink so that it's Copic friendly and coloring in with my Copic markers. I'm starting off with these little gray squirrels. I wanted them to be a different color since I knew my owls were going to be brown. So I'm doing them in my warm grays. I have W6, W4, and W2, and I will have all of my colors listed at the top of the screen, so if you wanted to reference those, you can. I started with the darkest color, which is the W6, and I added the shading to the back of the squirrels, and then came in with the W4 and blended out with the W2. And sometimes, depending on the size of the critter or the image that I'm coloring, I will go over them twice, which is what I did for the squirrels because I really wanted to have a nice deep shadow in the back behind them. And then just finishing out blending with the W2. Now for my owls, I'm starting in with the belly. So I have E40 as I'm laying down my first color, which is the lightest. Then I'll have my darkest color, which is the E42, and my midtone is E41. And then same thing, I'm just going back in, deepening up those shadows to give it just a little bit more color. And for the body of the owls, I'm doing E79, E25, and E33. And you can see I added my darkest color to the backs of the owls and a little bit kind of where their ridge is or the tops of their head, just to put a little shadow in there. And then once again going back over it and blending them out. And that is personal preference. That's just something I really like to do when coloring, especially on the Nina cardstock because it does soak up color quite a bit. So I just like to come back in and really have some nice shadows and give this a little bit more of a dimensional look to it so it doesn't look so flat. And then just doing Y35 for the beak and the feet, and giving these some cute little rosy cheeks with R22. Now for my ghosts, these can be kind of hard to color sometimes because ghosts typically have white, but there's still going to be shading to them. So I'm using my cool grays for this. I have C3 as my darkest, then C1 and C0. And for the ghosts that are kind of facing towards each other, I added the shadows just on the one side and then blending out from the darkest to the lightest, and I don't go all the way in. I want to leave white space. That's kind of one of an important little trick when coloring white is you need to leave some white. Now for the pumpkins, I was trying to give them the lines in the pumpkins that you see just to give it a little bit more character. So I did that with my darkest marker, which is the YR27, and then I'll blend out with YR68 and YR15 as the lightest. Once in a while, I kind of change up how I do it. Sometimes I go straight into the darkest marker. For the pumpkins on this one, I do start out with the lightest, just to kind of have that base coat. It's however you feel comfortable with when you're coloring. This is just my personal preference, and I was really happy with how the pumpkins turned out. I really like the lines and the texture that it gave the pumpkins. And I'll do that for all of my pumpkins I have here. And blending out to that lightest color. So going from the top towards the bottom, not going all the way down. And then same thing, I'll work from the bottom up. So those lines kind of meet in the middle. A couple of them I'll take all the way up just to give that middle piece definition. And then the same thing on this one that has the lid. Bringing up some of those lines for the definition and blending it out with the lightest marker. and they can be different. No pumpkin is the same. I remember reading about the square pumpkin to my kids, so I kind of had that in mind when I was coloring them, that they're all going to be different. And that's what kind of makes them fun and gives them character. And I'm just finishing off this last pumpkin here, adding in those lines, blending that out, and then coming back in with that YR27 just to define that a little bit more. Now to do the stems, I'm not going to do a whole lot of blending because they are a really small area to color. So I'm just going to do G03 and G19 are the colors I finished with. I had a different color I tried and it just wasn't giving me that shadow look I wanted, so I brought in the G19. Then I'm going to come in with some black licorice ink, and I'm just going to add my smiley faces to my ghosts. And then I'll bring in all of these different facial expressions for my pumpkins. I love that you can customize this. You can either leave the pumpkins blank or you can give them each a different expression. So those are really fun. And I did that with the black licorice ink as well. So that's just a really nice black ink. And then adding in some cheeks. So here are all of my images that I die cut using the coordinating dies for each of them. And they're just so much fun. All of these cute little characters. I love those little squirrels. Now on to creating the card. So here I have the track piece that I just die cut out of white cardstock. This is the pocket panel. So you'll need two of them. I die cut one out of white and one out of black. Then we also have the panels that you'll be able to decorate, and you're going to want two of those. So I did go ahead off screen and die cut those out of white cardstock as well. And actually I die cut that out of Bristol smooth cardstock because I am going to be doing ink blending on that. And then I die cut out a circle for my moon using the circle stackable die. Here is the new spooky fence and the wonderful glitter paper. I love this glitter paper. Now to match the stitched lines on my panels, I'm going to go ahead and die cut all of those spooky fences, just the bottom portion, so that it'll line up with my panels when I'm done. Now I'm going to be doing some ink blending, so I'm using Twisted Citron, Mowed Lawn, and Blueprint Sketch. I'm laying down that Twisted Citron as kind of just a base coat on the bottom of all of those panels. And then I'll come back over it with the Mowed Lawn. I just really like having that base coat so there isn't just white peeking through. They'll have that green tint to it. I do recommend using a Post-it note to protect your fingertips because there is going to be a lot of ink and you don't want to transfer that throughout your projects. So that's what I use a lot of times, is hiding my fingertips with that Post-it note. Now I'm going to come in with the Blueprint Sketch, and this is going to be the sky portion of the card. I'm just going to lay a nice layer down on the top. I'm not worried about that line right now. I'm just getting all of that ink applied to the card. And what I like to do, so I don't contaminate my colors, is I'm going to take a sponge dauber that I have cleaned off prior, and it's just a dry sponge dauber, and I'm just smoothing out that line. So there's kind of a nice transition between the two. And that way I'm not going to be getting Blueprint Sketch into my Twisted Citron blending tool. So that's just kind of something I like to have on hand, of those spares. And then coming in with the black soot Distress Oxide color, and that's just to really deepen up that background and really give it that spooky look to go with all of my cute Halloween characters. And then evening that out again. And that'll be just a really nice smooth transition. Now to add some stars to the background, I just take some white paint. This is just a cheap craft paint that you can get from your hardware store. I put that on a block and I'm just flicking that onto my background. I do come in and add a little squirt of water to help loosen that up, and that will really give you some nice flicks. And you can see that really starts splattering, and I go back and do the one I had done already. And that just kind of gives you the look of stars and just kind of completes that background. And once that's done, I'll just put it off on the side to dry. So now to work on my moon, I'm using mustard seed as my main coat for my moon. And then I'm going to take a small finger dauber and use Ripe Persimmon and just kind of add some spots on there for the moon texture of the moon. And then I'll come back in with the mustard seed and blend that out. And I really like how that Ripe Persimmon looks. Your moons can be gray, they can be blue. I just went for this color combo and I thought it looked really neat together. And to give my moon just a little bit more character, I just splattered some water down on it and dabbed that up with a paper towel. Now to start assembling the card. So I'm using the 1/8 inch score tape and adding that to the top and bottom on both sides of this tracker piece. This fits perfectly on there and it's a really nice sticky adhesive. And then I'm folding this flap over on my pocket panels using the bone folder to give that a really nice strong crease. And I'm going to add that score tape to the top of that as well. And same thing on my ink blended panel. Using that score tape, and then I'll fold that over and crease that out with my bone folder. Now for the assembly of the actual slider, I'm bringing in my spooky fences that I had created, and I'm going to start attaching these to my card to get that scene started. So I'll use the Lawn Fawn liquid glue to attach all of these, and my tweezers to kind of keep my fingers out of the way. I'm applying that glue to the bottom and then just on that middle post and laying that down and pressing that down really good. And then it dawned on me I forgot to add my moon, so I quick added some glue to that and lifted my fence back up and was able to tuck my moon behind the fence. So it wasn't quite stuck down yet, and I do have that hanging off the bottom, and I'll come in and I'll trim that up later on. So I have my moon added. That is going to be the front panel, what you see when you would receive the double slider surprise. And then I can come in and start working on the pull-out panels and attaching my spooky fence down there. And I actually want to bring in all of my critters and my characters that I created, start laying out that scene that I want for each side. So my ghost was also one of them I kind of wanted to tuck in before I attached. So I just kind of lightly pulled that up a little bit and pushed back down. So I have my ghost. Each one is going to be similar on each side. So my ghosts are going to be the first thing. You want to make sure when you're putting your characters down, you don't go too close to the edge, because when you pull them out, you want to be able to see everything. So you want to keep that in mind too when you're creating these scenes on these pull-out panels. And then bringing in my pumpkins where I want to lay everything out. And I need to put together my carved pumpkins. So I'm going to layer that up, and I'm just using this Post-it note to kind of catch any excess glue in case I put a little bit too much on there. And I'll have his lid just kind of hanging off there a little bit. And I'm going to trim off my moon. And I love that look where it's just not a complete full moon yet coming out. I think that's one of my favorite panels out of this card. So now bringing in my critters and my ghost and just getting those lined up. My owls are going to be the very last characters on each card. And then I'll have my squirrels and my pumpkins. Now I have a couple pumpkins in the front, keeping in mind while I'm doing this that I also want to have a sentiment. So I want to make sure that I'm leaving a sentiment. Even though I'm having a lot of fun creating this scene, I need to have a sentiment on the front too. So I want to have that kept in mind. And then I'm going to use the Lawn Fawn glue to attach this. And since it is glittered paper, which is textured, once I have these glued down, I'm going to put a block on top, just kind of help hold them in place, give them a little bit more pressure, and making sure that glue really sticks to the glitter cardstock. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. This time my owl is going to be carrying the pumpkin. And then I'll just have the squirrel close to the ghost. And tweezers are just a really nice tool to use when you're working with small pieces like this, because that kind of helps keep your fingers out of the way. To me anyway, you're able to see the scene more. So I think that's just a really handy tool to have. So I do go back and double check, and the liquid glue is really holding great to the glitter cardstock, so I was really happy with that. This turned out great with that pressure. And if you notice, I'm missing something on this front panel. I forgot, or almost forgot, to add in the tabs on each side so that my panels can pull out. So before I add anything else to my card, I'm going to run that through and do that on the front panel and also that black cardstock that I had cut, because we want to be able to grab these panels. Now to actually create the slider mechanism, I'm using the exact same measurements and instructions that Kelly had used. So I just have, this is actually just a grocery bag that I had, and I cut that to 2 1/4 by 11 inches and added that 1/8 of an inch score tape to one end, and then just loosely let that paper or that plastic bag over and then trim that excess off. And I did have a little bit of a tough time at first getting it moving, but where my score tape was, I had a little lip there of extra, so I grabbed it and I started working that. So I got that moving really well. So using this grocery bag did work out for me. And just got that sliding. And then I need to attach some score tape to these. So I'll go ahead and do that on the left side. Add that score tape. And then flip this over and add it to the right side on the back. Then I'm just going to come in and trim off that little bit of excess I had hanging from the one side. And I'm going to start bringing in my panels to attach. Now, I do want to keep in mind what panel I want coming from each side. So I'm going to have those lined up where I want them. And then I can work on attaching it. So I'll go ahead and remove the backing of the score tape on the front panel. That one is going to pull out to the right hand side. So I'm just lining those edges up and attaching that left hand side. And then I'll flip that over, remove the backing on that side, flip over my decorated panel, and attach my right side. So then I can kind of get my slider moving. It moves really well. I have this cute little scene. And now to start working on getting the pocket put together. So I'll line up these two pieces right next to each other, attach my ink blended panel to the black cardstock, and then fold that over. So that's creating my pocket. And I just come back in with the bold folder, make sure that that is creased really nice and folding really well. And then bringing in my slider mechanism and making sure that that is fitting where I want it to. So I'll remove the backing on the back side of my slider mechanism and attaching that inside of the pocket, lining that up at the top and bringing that down. Once I have that in there, I do kind of give it a test run, make sure that my track is running smoothly. And it was a little tough getting going at first, but once I kind of played with it, then it got moving again. So then I went ahead and removed the backing for the pieces in the front, and I can close up my pocket to finish off that slider piece. So just push that down. Because I have so much in there, it is a little bit bulky, which I think might be part of why I was having a tough time getting started at first. But once I got it warmed up, it works perfectly. So now to finish off the front of this with my pumpkins, I did go ahead and attach foam squares to the back and added them to the front panel of my pocket. One last thing I need to do is my sentiment. So I die cut the banner from some black cardstock, and this is actually from the Double Slider Surprise die set. And I laid an acetate sheet over that banner so I could curve my sentiment with my banner. And this sentiment is from the Pick of the Patch stamp set. I'm going to prep that cardstock with an anti-static powder tool just to remove any fingerprints that might be there, just so that the embossing powder doesn't stick where I don't want it. And then I'm going to use the new Lawn Fawn clear ink, which is great for embossing. I'm loving it. So I stamp that down on the black cardstock, and then I'll sprinkle that with the white embossing powder and heat that up with the embossing gun. And you see I do have a little bit on the corner of my banner, must have been just my fingers were sticky, and I just brushed that off with a paintbrush. So that just came right off. Now to remove any powder that might still be there, I just come in with a Swiffer cloth and dust that over. And I love how that white embossing powder really pops on that black cardstock. So I'm just going to go ahead and attach that to the top of my pocket. And then I can pull these out on the side, and I have this great spooky Halloween scene. I am loving this double slider surprise die, and I'm betting you guys will too. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have an amazing day.